Hello everybody, in this video I will tell you 10 benefits of having permanent residency of Australia. So if you want to know, stay tuned. First point, the first benefit, right to live, study or work in Australia. So as a permanent resident, you are entitled to live, study or work in Australia indefinitely. There's no time limit. Initially, the permanent visa is given for 5 years and has to be applied again just before it expires. You can work for any employer in any occupation except the public sector and the armed forces, which is there for the citizens of Australia. Now, so many people ask this question that if you're going for one occupation, for one skilled occupation, can you work only for that particular occupation? No. You can work for any occupation. This applies for Australia and Canada. So you can work for any occupation after you get the PR. You can also go for your studies straight away. Right. So the second point, this might be a surprise for some people. You can live, study and work in New Zealand. Yes, the beautiful country next to Australia. With the Australian PR, you can visit, study and work in New Zealand indefinitely. You would not need to apply for a visa before traveling and can be granted a New Zealand resident visa when you arrive. Kind of an on-arrival visa. You can only apply for this visa when you arrive in New Zealand. You cannot apply for it before you travel. So you get the visa probably at the airport. If you leave New Zealand, your resident visa will expire. However, you can apply for a variation of travel conditions to allow your travel without affecting your New Zealand resident status. Okay, now the third point. Government subsidies to tuition fee for higher studies. So you can see this snapshot over here. This I've taken from one of the Australian colleges. You can check out, just like the Australian citizens, permanent residents are the domestic students, and unlike international students, Government of Australia gives subsidies to its domestic students. You can check out this snapshot over here. The tuition fee for the permanent residents and the citizens is almost half of the international students. So obviously if you want to study, then after getting your PR it would be much cheaper. And this is not the case with every college. I mean, it differs from one college, from one university to the other, but it's definitely subsidized for the citizens and the permanent residents. Okay, free healthcare services, a big bonus. This is the reason why many people actually immigrate to Canada and Australia. So the government-run Medicare health insurance schemes privilege will be available to the permanent residents, and though this through this you can obtain free of cost treatment at government hospitals and funded medicines as well. So the treatment would be free of cost. However, you have to pay some amount for the medicines, but that would also be subsidized. Right, the next point, free education for children. Now, each state government manages the school system within their state. Each state has both public and private schools. Now, public schools are funded by the government, and education until 12th grade is free or at marginal fee. It's important to notice here that, around 60% of the Australian children actually study in the public schools, but there are 40% which actually study in the private school as well. So it's a big number. So they actually pay for their studies, but it depends on from one person to the other. Okay, the freedom to travel, something really nice. As an Australian permanent resident, you'll have the freedom to travel in and out of Australia for 5 years. There's no limit. You can travel in and out as many times as you want. If your visa expires, you'll be eligible to stay in the country, but you'll not be able to leave Australia without a resident return visa. Right. So this is a good news that you don't have to worry about traveling in and out of Australia. You can travel as many times as you want. Okay, social security benefits. Permanent residents must reside in Australia with the PR visa for 2 years in order to become eligible for social security benefits. Now, what are these benefits actually? You'd be given, the sickness allowances, disability support allowances, unemployment allowance, and things like that. So, however, you'd be eligible for it only after 2 years of staying in Australia after you get the PR. Okay, now the eighth point. So, you can sponsor your family members for permanent residency. Something pretty beautiful. Australian government allows its permanent residents to sponsor your spouse, your children, and your parents as well. As a permanent resident, you can also sponsor your siblings and other elderly relatives as well under different visa subclasses and under certain conditions. They're pretty specific, so if you have specific questions about it, I would need to do my research to answer your questions. Okay, now the ninth point. This might bring a big smile to your face. You can apply for Australian citizenship and you can have that passport. You can have the Australian passport. It's one of the strongest in the world. So after spending 4 years in Australia as the permanent resident, you can apply for the Australian citizenship. The citizenship test needs to be passed for this process, and a nominal fee of around 250 Australian dollars needs to be paid. Now, this can be a citizenship test or an interview. It depends on the authorities. So you can get the Australian citizenship after 4 years of staying in Australia as a permanent resident, mind it. Okay. Now, Australian-born children become Australian citizens. This is the last point here, but it's a very important one. That if your child gets born in Australia while you are the permanent resident, in that case, the children, whosoever actually gets born in Australia, would become the permanent residents would become the Australian citizens straight away by birth. So, they would be having the Australian passport. This would be one of the great advantage because they'll enjoy the maximum benefits in the field of education and healthcare. Obviously, the citizens are being given the maximum benefits. They have the right to vote. They are given easy loans. So, or other social benefits also your child can get from the birth itself. So guys, these were the 10 points that I wanted to tell you. 10 points that are the benefits of having permanent residency in Australia.